is Steve with GoddamnFitness.com, your number one for research supplements. How do athletes use PEDs in sports? Today in this video, we'll talk about what's the history of drug testing, the definition of doping in sports, what does USADA and WADA do, prohibited items and ban lists by USADA and WADA, how is testing performed on athletes, how many athletes are tested on average, what are TUEs, what is the best natural PED supplement, what are the benefits of PEDs, do they really make a difference, and how are athletes punished? Right, what's the history of drug testing? Well, it really dates back to baseball, believe it or not. It's not the most physical sport, but it's where doping really became popular. In 1889, it was widely known that people were using PEDs in baseball. Things like a testosterone supplement which came from the testicles of dogs or guinea pigs. It said that there was one time where 80% of baseball athletes were on some sort of amphetamine or PED. This was totally acceptable in the 80s and 90s. They even mentioned it throughout Congress investigations. In 1991, the commissioner at the time sent a memo to all teams stating that steroid use was against the rules of Major League Baseball. So the definition of doping in sports. Well, the use of a substance or a technique to legally improve an athletic enhancement is pretty much it. Basically, the use of drugs or other methods to improve athletic performance. The spectrum of this is expanding with SARMs, selective androgen receptor modulators, and myostatin inhibitors. Peptides and secretagogues like MK677 are also banned. Cardarine and ADHD medication are also prohibited. Diuretics and things like cortisol are banned, and narcotics and cannabinoids are blocked for most uses in most sports. What does WADA and USADA do? Well, they're the World Anti-Doping Agency. WADA brings policies and regulation to sports organizations and governments all around the world. They oversee acceptance, implementation, and compliance of the code that keeps together the rules. They oversee athletes, education, science, and medicine, and coordinate anti-doping programs. The most popular anti-doping agency is USADA, which is based in the United States. The United States Anti-Doping Agency oversees Olympic, Paralympic, and Pan American sports. They test for in and out of competition, process results, athletic drug education, and list drug references resources for allowing athletes to be clean. So general prohibited ban lists of USADA and WADA. Well, they define this in three different types of categories on their website. So prohibited items at all times, non-approved substances that are expected to be reviewed if there's any concern, anabolic agents, metabolites, anabolic agents like clenbuterol and SARMs, peptides like EPO, agonists, you name it, it's all there. Growth hormone and insulin substances. Prohibited and in competition stimulants like amphetamines and narcotics like cocaine. There's also cannabinoids. They're also listed on their website, and it might be changing with the legalization of cannabis in certain states across the US. They also list things like cortisol. Prohibited in particular sports. Then they list beta blockers. So these can be banned in certain sports that are listed below. So they really define them very thoroughly for athletes to review. How is testing performed on athletes? Well, USADA tests their athletes in multiple ways. It generally starts out by a blood test or urine sample. They list this on their website that athletes can be tested 365 days a year without any notice, and they must inform USADA of their schedule or any reports and any changes. This is a similar setup in Europe and other equivalents around the world. They have similar types of programs that are monitored by WADA. Right, what's the best natural PED supplement? Well, in my opinion, it's arachidonic acid, and this is currently not on their prohibited items list. So it is possible to get your hands on, and it is possible to take, and it should build muscle and really just make you a stronger athlete. So Really depends on the sport you're doing. I wouldn't recommend it across all sports, but specific to weightlifting, also beta estrogen is not considered a banned supplement. And then there's other natural testosterone boosters like D-aspartic acid and tribulus. But you know what? It depends where you're really sourcing these chemicals. John Jones, for example, sourced some of these substances in China, and in the same cylinder, they used testosterone, types of anabolic steroids, and they found picograms in the system, they seemingly said. So this can all be kind of controversial. So make sure you do your research if you are a professional athlete. Right. So what are the therapeutic use exceptions? So the TUEs. So it's an exception for therapeutic purposes only. It needs to be administered by USADA. They approve athletes from receiving uh, you know, using a substance. Um, so pretty much you can get certain types of exceptions. Maybe it's using a supplement for recovery purposes if you're injured. If you do suffer from attention deficit disorder, you might be allowed to take some sort of amphetamine, but it's very closely monitored. Are there benefits of PEDs really making a difference? Yes, I believe the benefits of PEDs really do make a difference to the individual in sports. This is where it gets controversial, guys. The majority of performance enhancing drugs are useful for recovery, which means less injury and more time to train in the grand scheme of an athlete's life. You rarely hear other athletes get upset because the winner won because of steroids. You'll hear that they didn't win because they got caught using steroids. If you're a high performing athlete with a certain lifestyle, I think it's easy to get carried away with yourself in your career and to take it to the next level using PEDs. They have families to provide for like everyone else. I don't blame athletes for this. If you review my older articles, you'll understand that taking steroids gets very specific. It's not the more you take, the better you'll be. This is very misguiding. Clearly, testosterone is useful and is good for recovery. So, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's beneficial banning most substances, but it would be better to have some sort of regulation that would apply. So it's kind of disheartening for national athletes, especially when they want to train more, but their body won't allow them to proceed. There's a system telling them to stop because it's not efficient. My own opinion really is simply just to regulate this. It's very hard to even how to define the regulation, but it's really, corruption is happening at a high end with athletes is my belief, even with taking TUEs. So you can look at the Lance Armstrong's case, for another case study in this sample. What are the punishments of tested athletes? Well, it depends on the situation. Recently, in April 2019, TJ Dillashaw was caught using EPO. He received a 2-year suspension by USADA. So they found new ways of finding to detect EPO injections. John Jones received a suspension for using a steroid, but was found true in picograms, which is the size of a salt grain. It's believed that this was a tainted product from the same cylinder in China, like I mentioned earlier. So this is happening all the time, guys. They seem to be getting stricter and stricter as time goes by, and the testing is improving. The bottom line, right? Doping in sports has been popular for decades, guys, and it always will be. Athletes on high pay grade salaries have a whole SWAT team of scientists to keep them successful through research chemicals and new discoveries that are frequently made. This is my own opinion. UFC fighters have come forward like Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz to claim everyone is on steroids, and I agree with this. The fans were very upset with John Jones and other UFC fighters for being caught multiple times. And in more recent times, the testing has improved, like finding picograms. I'm under the opinion that it depends on the athlete. USADA is a money-making machine that has employees and they're backed by the government. So they're incentivized to make this more strict and ruin the beliefs and events. So with other UFC fighters, it's getting even more controversial. So with Brock Lesnar returning to UFC 200, he was clearly on testosterone, and he's actually currently being sued. Well, he's not being sued by Mark Hunt, but Mark Hunt is suing the UFC for letting him go ahead. So he essentially only needed to be clean for 6 months to return to the UFC. So it's all very controversial, and it really depends on the athlete, guys. So, like I say here, USADA magically came up with a valid reason to grant an exception to the rule, which he did. Lesnar promptly ruled eligible to fight Mark Hunt in Las Vegas. Then Lesnar failed a pre-drug test 11 days before the event, but he was still allowed to fight. So I obviously think this needs to be regulated to some extent. Taking EPO can be deadly, and if it's administered incorrectly, it can be pretty much deadly. Uh, so I'm not an expert here, guys, but I really thought it would be good to have some new policies implemented. The worst part is a lot of this isn't even sports related. A lot of it can even be associated with Instagram models posing the perfect bodies to make people really feel insecure about themselves, but they're really cheating as well. I mean, if everyone was just honest, it would be a much better kind of situation. In the underground community, the attitude is that it's not illegal to take steroids, it's illegal to get caught taking steroids. So I'm not an advocate of steroids. I believe that they should be more accepted in society, and I prefer to educate people on the right way of doing things so it's safer than kids just injecting themselves and doing it anyway. There's a stigma in society against steroids in sports, and I think once people really realize the sad truth of the dark side of doping in sports, it'll become, a lot more acceptable. So to summarize, guys, supplements and research chemicals do come with their side effects and risks, and a lot of these are still under research. A lot of them aren't approved by the FDA and are not listed for human consumption. Check your local laws by the time you view this video. This is all just for your educational purposes only. Hope this video finds you well. If you like it, give us a pound below, share and subscribe, and check out our article for more details on this subject listed below, and click on us to get the most cutting edge information available. Thank you for listening.